Altcoins are about to enter the most parabolic phase of the bull run, and I'm going to be using the Ethereum chart to explain my reasoning behind this. Make sure to stick around to the end because this video is going to be quite long, but extremely informative. So, if you've been following me for at least the last couple weeks, you probably saw the video I made about how my most bullish price target for the end of this cycle on Ethereum is between roughly 15 to 20,000, right? Most people think that's crazy, but I actually think it's very realistic. And what I outlined is how, pretty much since Ethereum's inception, before it expands to the upside, it likes to form, pretty massive accumulation ranges, right? The first one was from 2016 to 2017, about a year of accumulation. And then your high time frame expansion phase lasted about 1 year, right? Same thing with 2020 to 2021. Yeah, you had about a year of upwards price action. But it was preceded by about 2 years of consolidation, which is twice as long as the first one. And I think, pretty much since 2022, Ethereum's been in a massive high time frame accumulation range, which this one's lasted about twice as long as the previous one. Hopefully you can kind of see the pattern. And I think eventually, once this breaks out of this range, 3,500, 4,000, you're going to see that move eventually up to 15 to 20,000. But something I didn't mention is this price target is more of a long-term target. I'm talking the next, maybe 12 to 18 months. But the question is, what's going to happen over the next 6 months, specifically in the altcoin market? I'm going to be explaining what I think. So, something we have to point out is, I guess maybe I don't have to get rid of these ranges. Maybe I will. So, pretty much the first and most parabolic phase for the price expansion for Ethereum, this was actually the best time to be positioned in altcoins and also to sell when this move was over, right? Yes, I know in 2017, Ethereum's price went much higher from 400 to 1200. But if you look at the altcoin market, altcoins, had their largest and most parabolic move when Ethereum made its first expansion to the upside. And obviously, this was also the most parabolic move for Ethereum. Same thing with 2020 to 2021. From November 2020 to, May of 2021, you could even say March of 2021, this was the largest and most parabolic phase for altcoins, right? Yes, Ethereum went higher during these cycles later on, but in this channel, we specifically focus on altcoins. And if you look at altcoin price performance, this was the best time to sell. Quarter one, quarter two of 2021, and, summer of 2017. Because if you look, after Ethereum made its top in 2017, this thing corrected 63%, 60 to 65%. And if the second largest crypto is correcting 65%, your altcoins are probably going to be correcting more like 70, 80, 90%. And you do not want to be holding your bags when a massive correction like this happens on Ethereum, right? You want to be selling up here around the top. And after a massive correction, you can reevaluate, right? Maybe you can reinvest some of the profits you took earlier. Maybe you can reinvest everything. I don't know. That's up to you. But what I'm focused on right now is positioning myself for another massive move on Ethereum, which will probably be the most parabolic phase for altcoins. And I also wanted to mention that in 2023 and 2024, we also had a parabolic move for Ethereum. Yes, it wasn't as crazy as 2017 and 2021, but when Ethereum went from 1,800 to 4,000, your altcoins were performing extremely well, right? It doesn't matter if Ethereum is breaking all-time highs or not, because when you're going parabolic and you make that first move, that's the best time to sell your altcoins, right? Because if you would have sold your alts in, March or April of 2024, a lot of them actually topped here, and this was their most parabolic phase. And everything after that has been, pretty much a way to make everybody lose their money, right? Any of these moves on Ethereum, most alts didn't really do anything, and it hasn't been very good, right? But what I think is going to happen is we're going to have another expansion phase similar to 2024, 2021, and 2017, right? And during that first move to the upside is actually where altcoins are going to be performing extremely well, and it could be the best time to sell. And I think this is going to happen going into the end of this year, 2026. But if we look at the shorter time frame, right? I already marked out these massive accumulation ranges, right? 2016 to 2017, 2018 to 2020, and also, pretty much 2022 to 2026. But if you look, before these crazy moves up on Ethereum, in 2016, you had roughly, 10 to 15 weeks of this accumulation before the massive move, right? Same thing with 2020, you had another, 10 to 15 weeks of accumulation before the move up. And then we also saw this in 2023, about 10, 15, 20 weeks of accumulation before expansion. And, I can just kind of show you guys how long they lasted, more or less. So this one was maybe 16 weeks. Obviously, this isn't perfect. I'm just showing you more or less what I see happening. 2020, this one was another, 14 weeks. 2013 was another, this one was maybe a little less, 11 weeks. And then I think, from the bottom in June of this year, we've seen straight accumulation on Ethereum, right? And obviously, my entire thesis is not based on just Ethereum's price action. A lot of this is lined up with charts like the business ISM, DXY, other stuff like that. So if you go look at Ethereum's chart and compare it to all these other indexes, a lot of this matches up. So that's why I'm using it. But this time around, we have, roughly 10 weeks of accumulation, we've seen since the bottom of June. So I think, something similar to 2023, 2020, and 2017, this accumulation range is almost up. And I think pretty much, just looking at price, when you break out of this, $2,000 level, I think the move is going to happen. And that's going to be the most parabolic move for altcoins. So, even though my long-term targets for Ethereum are between 15 to 20K, I think the first move it makes up is not going to reach that high, but it's going to be, regardless if it goes to 6,000 or 10,000, it's going to be the most parabolic move for altcoins. And if I delete these accumulation ranges, or the bars here, and we look how long the expansion phases lasted, the first one was only 15 weeks. 15 weeks, your alts went parabolic and it was time to sell. That's not very long. The second time around, it was about, let's see here. Honestly, I would say it's from November 2020 to roughly February 2021. I mean, go look at most altcoins. Their largest move, most parabolic move to the upside was actually over by February. So this one was only, like 13, 14, 15 weeks, not very long. That's how many months? Like 3 or 4 months? That's crazy. And then it happened again in 2023. It depends where you want to consider this as the start of the expansion phase. But, I mean, you could say it was only, let's see here. It was only 15 weeks up. That's like 4 months and it's over. So, These altcoin positions are not investments. They're position buys that we are going to be selling once this most parabolic phase happens for Ethereum, right? So if we see that breakout, let's say it happens, I don't know, the end of August or beginning of September, you could see 15 weeks of, you know, insane parabolic price action for Ethereum, which would also mean that altcoins are doing extremely well, and that could actually be the time to sell. And this would literally put us like November, December of this year. So obviously there's a lot more things I would have to, show you to explain exactly why I believe this, but this video is already like 11 minutes long, so I'm going to leave it there, but I believe that this is more or less what's going to happen with Ethereum. We've seen roughly, 10 to 15 weeks of accumulation, just like 2023, 2020, and 2017. And this next move to the upside, whether it goes to $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, I don't know. It doesn't matter because it's going to be going parabolic, and that is your time to sell altcoins. But the most important thing is positioning before this move happens, right? Because if you look, you know, by the time this move happened on Ethereum, 15-week move, this is when people started getting into crypto, right? When altcoins already did those, 5, 10x moves to the upside. Summer 2016, summer 2017, the spring of 2021, right here, spring of 2024. This is when most people are going to be getting into crypto, right? Obviously, I think it's likely we see another move to the upside later on, but a lot of altcoins are going to go through massive corrections and they might not even make higher highs. I mean, we saw that in 2021, right? A lot of alts actually topped in March, April, and May of 21. And this also happened in 2024 where, a lot of alts topped here in March. And then 2017, I'd have to look into it a little bit more. There wasn't as many altcoins, but a lot of them, they made their biggest move right here from March 2017 to June of 2017. After that, they had massive corrections, and people who were getting in right here or holding their bags who had made massive profits were down, from the high 70, 80, 90%. And you don't want to be holding when that happens. You want to be selling, and then if the market drops, you can reevaluate later, right? So I think eventually, sooner than later, the next, maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks, you're going to see that breakout, and the most parabolic phase of the bull run is going to happen for altcoins. This is just what I think. None of this is financial advice, just my opinions, but I think the move is coming very soon. And, by the time Ethereum's at $5, $6, $7,000 and altcoins have gone up 5 to 10x, that's when you're going to see most people getting into the crypto, and that's actually like the worst time, and probably right before a major correction happens. But anyways, hopefully this video was informative. I know it was quite long, but this is what I think is going to happen more or less.